No, all the chairs are there.
Ben?
I don't know if I'm supposed to help them load it up.
Push for hate also.
Thank you. The magic button. I think it does. Unless they turn it off for the season, you know. I'm not sure. Right. Unbelievable. May 23rd. It's like,
Yeah. Tomorrow, it's snowing in Vermont and upstate, by Tucker Lake.
Yeah, I mean.
Snow on May 23rd.
Well, if you're on, but yeah, that'd be great. Thank you, Ben.
oh, thank you. Absolutely. Your house cold, Stephanie?
I'm always calling.
No. Yeah, people differ that way.
One downside of being thin is
Yeah.
just get cold.
Yes. Yes.
That, like,
Right. 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 Right.
come up.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, it is. Yes, there are those who just have cold feet. It's really true. No, I know. Yeah, right. No, I mean physically. They're not otherwise cold, but their feet are always cold.
Mostly cold.
Yeah.
Spring, apparently, fall.
How
And
many?
then when it's hot,
Yeah, right.
hot,
It's really hot.
you also don't want to pump the AC.
Yeah, right, 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 right.
Oh.
All the different forms of suffering. That classic example they give, oh, I'm inside. Oh, I think I want to go outside. Miller Rabin said this, you go outside and you're outside. Oh, I need to go inside. It's
Yeah.
just like just back and forth.
You get worse with age.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's true. I'm sure it can, but generally I think just biologically it does get worse with age. For instance, when they have like I don't know what they're called, like a big outbreak, like a heat, the old people die more than the young people do. And I guess they do from cold too, but I don't know. Uh,
I'm actually reading the story of Milarepa.
oh,
Good.
it's amazing.
Inspiring.
Yeah, it really is inspiring. Talk about purification. Yeah, truly amazing. Yeah.
They're always pushing they always perfectly
Yeah.
get your spots or you're sensitive.
Yeah.
Every,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Every time.
great, ultimately, but it's a difficult.
Yeah, because all of that is, people who aren't in that situation, it's basically all hidden from them. It never comes up, so they don't think it's there and they don't see the obstacles. Then they sit down and meditate and they just wonder, why do I have all these obstacles?
Must have them at some point, even if
Sure.
it's right at the end of life, they're
Yeah.
alone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of like the God realm, where it's like, oh,
Right.
all of a sudden everything's
Right. There's truly no escape. People know that their motivation is different.
As long as they can get better, I'm hopeful.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Doesn't have to be perfect, but
No,
a little
no.
less suffering.
Right.
Get to a place where, oh, I'm not suffering as much, but then it will sort of revert back.
Uh,
Waiting to
uh,
this.
yeah,
I think I'm making progress.
yeah, yeah.
Some sort comes to call.
Come to call. Come to call.
I'll show you.
This is some sort of wish calling,
Yeah, always calling. All right.
24/7.
We got us on. We can start. Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. It's a cold night here in Rochester for our Zoomer participants. And yeah, we've spent a lot of time going through karma because it's so important. I mean, as you know, Gaur Rinpoche has said that the whole Buddha Dharma is just karma on one hand and emptiness on the other. Um, there it is complete. And the other way is as far as our attitude is all motherly sentient beings and dreamlike. So if you just have those two things, suddenly things become a lot simpler. Because then you realize that all this, the 84,000 different heaps of practices, teachings, symbolisms, all of that stuff, you see where it fits in, so to speak. And so it becomes less of, getting confused by all the trees that we never see the forest. It helps us see the forest. For that matter, the conventional teachings are similar in that way, in that they build confidence. Because rather than just wandering around and hoping that this is true or whatever, you have a way of dealing with it, of pounding into it with your ordinary dualistic mind. And of course, that's really good because you're working on it all the time. Your mind is actually directed in the right way, and the questioning, you end up knowing, and you know that you know. And of course, that's so much stronger. It's like a parent with a child. The child just doesn't get anything really, but the parent has the confidence that comes from experience, and this is more than just book learning. But at the same time, book learning can get us towards experience and give us the confidence to not be wasting time with other things. So it's all good. But interestingly, karma, cause and effect, and emptiness. So we've spent these last several weeks because this book, interestingly, has two, long sections on karma because it's just that important. It's always been of interest to me, something that was really inspiring, but also instructive. You see a great master, and what are they doing? They're teaching a karma all the time. So this dualistic idea that karma is some sort of lower thing, right? That's leading us to some higher thing. In one way, that's true, but it's not just provisional. It is the real thing expressed in a dualistic way, so that we can understand it perfectly. So the Buddha, again, from his great enlightenment, in the end, he didn't stay away from teaching people rather than just being some sort of a ascended master off in the Himalaya, which people could worship basically. Instead, he brought it right down to earth, with love, wanting beings to be happy, compassion, wanting beings to be free from sorrow altogether, and then the responsive joy, feeling joy in the virtuous things that you see. And then finally, the great equanimity, the great impartiality. We like to pretend to ourselves that we can be impartial because it's so important. When they teach on the four immeasurables, they start with impartiality. So at least you have that set in your mind. But it's actually the higher of those four states. And we tend to think, we tend to, not that we denigrate it, but we tend to not appreciate the real profundity of it because, we think we can be impartial. The legal system thinks it's, objective, all of that. But that's a mistake. That's a mistake. When you think of compassion, for instance, just wanting to remove beings from suffering, removing the source of suffering from beings, it talks when we're talking about, again, this simplicity of Buddhism just simply being compassion and wisdom, or paya, skillful means, and wisdom. The compassion that they're talking there has a capital C. I don't know Sanskrit or Tibetan, but I think there's a difference between the compassion of the four immeasurables and the compassion that they're talking about as upaya. That's why we capitalize it. Because what they're talking about is this state of objectless compassion. So that's the great equanimity, of course, the great impartiality, objectless compassion. It's profound when you think about it. You're going around during the day, and what the world calls equanimity or impartiality most of the time is just an indifference. You know, I don't care about that. I don't care about her. I don't care about whatever. So I think that I'm thinking objectively or impartially, but we're just not engaged. And it's a false kind of equanimity. So again, we spend so much time on karma because it's that important, and we've truly, I mean, kind of race through it, but it's good to keep in mind, of course. Now we're on chapter 11, which is the three scopes. And basically, it's small, medium, and large. I love the way the Tibetans um, categorize things. Uh, he calls the third one great scope. But let's start out with the small scope. What is the small scope? The essential practice for the person of small scope, or for one who is starting out on the path, includes the contemplation of the following. So that's important. One who is starting out on the path. These are not fixed categories. In other words, you don't have a little branding. You're not branded by someone that says you are a person of small scope. And of course, we're all Americans, so we want to skip over small scope, medium scope, be the great scope. But of course, you get to one by the other. And these things can happen very quickly. That's the other thing. So it's so important to recognize there's nothing wrong with a small scope. Again, we're approaching the Dharma from where we're at. We're not trying to be someone else. We're not trying to put on any airs, because it starts with this great renunciation. It's immediately humbling. And of course, that's good, because the humble mind, one that's willing to learn, open to instruction, um, is the good mind. Okay, so the essential practice for a person of small scope, or for one who's starting out on the path, includes contemplation of the following. Okay, what? The fully endowed body, death and general impermanence, suffering and the lower states of rebirth, taking refuge, and the law of cause and effect. These contemplations complement formal meditation and form the basis for the practice of the person of medium scope. In his Bodhicharyavatara, Shantideva wrote that since all non-virtuous actions result in misery, it is worthwhile to contemplate the law of cause and effect for a lifetime. When attachment of this life has been renounced and one sets one's mind to working for future lives, the small scope has been attained. So you can see how great that is already. That, here we are thinking about future lives. I mean, that's kind of rare actually in our culture. So when attachment for this life has been renounced and one sets one's mind to working for future lives, the small scope has been attained. At this point, one should not cease the former contemplations. Since one may regress, review is both necessary and valuable. One should further not be satisfied with one's present attainment, for it is still bound in samsara, and the higher states of rebirth, for which one strives, do not give permanent happiness. They may rather be likened to escaping from a prison for a few weeks to be with a friend before returning to receive a death sentence. How many people have that attitude? So the small scope, the topics of contemplation, first is such an important principle here, because you know how it's taught. In my old mind, I'm forgetting all the terms, but the three something, three excellences, I think, are hearing, contemplating, or analyzing, and then meditating. This is so helpful because there's so much out there in the public, but hey, meditation, meditation, meditation. But no one's talking about the contemplation or analysis. No one's talking about even hearing the correct teachings to begin with. So he has these topics of contemplation, and you can probably recognize already the similarity to the Nundro, the outer Nundro. So Nundro is this Tibetan term that means go before. It's the go before practices. So they're often called the preliminary practices in English, but this already is kind of misleading how English is not on the money, because they are the preliminary practices to the entry into the Vajrayana. So they're not preliminary practices in the sense that we're, starting out with self-liberation, but But nonetheless, this is the Geluk tradition does it a little bit different. This is a Geluk Lama writing, so it's a little different. But there they are, the fully endowed body, which in the Nundro is usually called the precious human body, death and general impermanence. Impermanence, of course, is in there. Suffering in the lower states of rebirth, taking refuge in the law of cause and effect. So in the Nundro, the cause and effect and the suffering nature of samsara, those four thoughts are there. And then it ends with taking refuge is the beginning of what's called the inner Nundro. But we're not talking about Nundro right now, just the three scopes. I want you to see the similarities because this text is completely sutric level teaching. Okay, so that's the small scope where you are thinking about, future, giving up, renouncing attachment to samsara, our worldly, doesn't mean that you're not doing things that another person looks at and says, yeah, it looks kind of worldly. But you're not doing it with some idea that somehow there's going to be ultimate happiness there. So in a way, you're really free for the first time. I mean, I knew someone who, bought a new truck and he was in love with that truck from the beginning and it was completely beautiful truck. But then, of course, the second week, someone scratched his truck with a key. I don't think it was on purpose, but nonetheless, you come out and the imperfection is just magnified by the perfection of that truck, the otherwise perfection of that truck. So it becomes a source of suffering, just the opposite of what we think. It's so samsaric. We think this is going to give me ultimate happiness, and then something goes wrong, and there's disappointment, there's betrayal, there's a million things. So if we don't have that, or we're not trying to make these appearances do something that they can't do, immediately there's a benefit for us because we're not going to have that overwhelming betrayal and disappointment. Rather, we're seeing things as they really are, and that's, of course, the step towards emptiness. But nonetheless, we go from that small scope of just the renunciation, the basic renunciation that we're training ourselves in again and again and again and again. We're contemplating on the fully endowed body, death and general impermanence, suffering of the lower states of rebirth, which is an incentive, taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and then finally the law of cause and effect. So there's a spiritual grounding in who and what we are. And that leads to the medium scope. The medium scope, the person of medium scope, thus has a strong desire to escape from the wheel of suffering, that is, from all samsaric states. To do so, one must free oneself from the delusion of self-grasping. This freedom is attained by cutting the ties of karma and the kleshas. The kleshas are the afflictions that arise in our mind: greed, anger, ignorance, jealousy, pride, all the manner of those things. There are many, many of them, which results in arhatship. So arhat is a conqueror, one who has conquered the afflictive emotions and who has conquered the delusion of self-grasping is an arhat. It's a very highly advanced state. It's said that the arhat's understanding is so great that they can walk through a solid wall because they see the reality of it and are living that kind of a level. And also the insight of an arhat. This is one reason that, there's not a sectarian teaching, because although the bodhisattva leads to even a higher realization and eventually to Buddhahood, the arhat may be more deeply realized up until like the seventh level, seventh bhumi. So one never criticizes for this way. It's not some sort of a competition or a race. The foundation of all attainments up to Buddhahood is the development of renunciation. This is one of the three principal paths, which also include bodhicitta and understanding of shunyata, of emptiness. All teachings on the Dharma are concerned with these paths, at least a relative understanding of them is necessary before receiving any initiation. Of the three, renunciation must be developed first. So again, the teaching is renunciation, which is self-liberation, bodhicitta, which again is engaging with for all sentient beings, and then emptiness. This triad is very helpful to understand, and it's not like you want to dwell in one or the other, but we're approaching all of them simultaneously. But it's very important because there are many people who can be very intelligent even, and they read about emptiness and sort of these great mental states, kind of the absolute truth. And of course, it's very attractive and they're inspired. But somehow they want to skip over bodhicitta. They want to skip over renunciation. And again, the term renunciation, I think both in Sanskrit and Tibetan, means emerging from the swamp. It's totally positive. It's not a denial. It recognizes the swamp. You know, you're not some happy camper in the middle of a swamp and just saying, hey, there's no problem here. No, you recognize every detail, every quality of the swamp, the limitations. But then, of course, getting yourself out of the swamp is a positive thing, as opposed to kind of the flavor of the English word, renunciation. Boy, that just sounds so bad to me. You know, nunce is nothing. Shun the state of the stuff, the state of nothing or not having, and then re again and again and again. And it always seems to me, you know, we live in such a basically a Protestant culture that there's this sense of, you know, this hurts me so much it must be good for me. But that's not renunciation. The kernel, the spark of wisdom is in that renunciation, because what it's coming from is a recognition that none of this is going to work in the way that our ego wants it to work. It just can't happen. So immediately that's a renunciation, and immediately that's a benefit because we're not spending all this kind of psychic energy and physical energy running around after dead ends, looking for love in all the wrong places. We still do because of our habit, but the intensity of it, I mean, the 110% intensity has been drained from it because we've seen through it. First, just conceptually, no problem. But then we analyze that. That's the second step, the contemplations. Is this really true, what I've heard? And then finally, in our meditation, which is also walking around during the day, but our mindset is kind of like permeated or perfumed by the understanding of our analysis, then you start experiencing. And so this is really good because, you know, you see, you get in a dispute with someone or someone just texts some crazy thing to you. And there's like more space in the mind. You don't have to respond in some sort of knee-jerk kind of way. And what happens when you don't respond sometimes you do have to respond instantly, but you're gaining the discriminating power whether to do or not, act, not act. But you do have the experience instead of a knee-jerk kind of response to these kind of challenges. Nothing happens, you don't do anything, and then lo and behold, you see it from a different perspective, or the problem just goes away, or the other person changes, because their mind is infinite too, and we're not seeing all of that. There's so many chances for misunderstanding. So,
Renunciation also described as participating in a non-attached way.
I don't think that's the literal meaning of the syllables, but certainly that makes sense too. You know? Whereas contemplation of the fully endowed body and impermanence leads to renunciation of attachment to this light, contemplation of the law of cause and effect results in the abandonment of desire for all samsaric states. When one is totally repulsed by worldly pleasures, full renunciation has been attained. And interesting, you see this middle scope is being developed from the contemplation of the smaller scope. So all of this is of one piece. There's really just one Dharma, but it's presented in all these different facets. Like Garampache says, it's just one great jewel, but many different facets on that diamond. And so you're looking at it from different angles other people looking at it from different angles that you're not even aware of, but that the apparent differences is helpful to you if you're trying to understand, digging through. You work out the contradictions or what are seeming contradictions, but actually there are not contradictions. But what a goal. When one is totally repulsed by worldly pleasures, full renunciation has been attained. And of course, you can't be manipulated anymore. Contemplation of the Four Noble Truths and the suffering of all samsaric states is essential for one of medium scope. Contemplating the Four Noble Truths leads to a strong wish for liberation and to the attainment of bodhicitta, since only by knowing one's own suffering will one truly develop mercy and compassion for others. So that's very significant. You know, compassion is not just some pity or not some looking down. The Dalai Lama says the Bodhisattva compassion is not looking down on suffering sentient beings. Isn't that how we think of it in the West? You know, there's so much what's called virtue signaling out there in the public world. People make these professions of compassion, but of course they're always doing it in a way that kind of puts them up here, as if you're sort of above it all, or you know enough not to get involved like that. But Dalai Lama says Buddhist compassion is looking up to sentient beings. They have all been our mothers in a previous lifetime. I have this worldly existence right now because of their suffering. They not only suffered through all the pangs of birth and all of that, but through keeping a child alive. I mean, I have some clients who, you know, were like addicted, and some of them even abandoned their kids. But the child is here. The child has this precious human birth, the greatest opportunity to come to enlightenment, even greater than the gods, because she suffered for those 9 months and did whatever she had to do to give the child birth. So the gratitude that you have to a mother is really inconceivable. It's greater than anything else. But at the same time, we recognize through the immensity of space and time that even the ones who are not giving birth this time around have given birth in the end. So they are our mothers too. There are other ways you can think of it too, because if you really want to completely understand yourself, we are obviously existing in relation to different things. You know, for instance, I say I have arms. Why? Because there are things that don't have arms. So you or any object in the universe, to be completely understood, I mean, we're talking about omniscience, to be completely understood, you have to understand everything that is, in this dualistic sense, not that thing. So for yourself, to really understand yourself, you have to understand the infinity, the infinite sentient beings. And then you start to get an appreciation of just how incredible Buddhahood is. Good in the beginning, good in the middle, good in the end. One will be more personally interested in the cause of suffering and less inclined to simply accept the words of the Buddha, which, although easy to do, is not fruitful. Without realizing the truth of the origin of suffering, there's no way to cut the ties of samsara. Through careful observation and contemplation, one arrives at the conclusion that one's mistaken belief in the reality of an independent self is the root of all suffering. Just as the sense of touch covers one's body, so this delusion inseparable from all thoughts. While applying the four opponent powers deals with kleshas, the afflictions, in their advanced stages, only the understanding of shunyata is able to cut them at the root. So when Kempo was talking last Sunday, I think it was, you see how all of these teachings, you know, they're like people go deeper and deeper into them, or they get more kind of powerful and elaborate and higher. So for instance, here, when we talk about, you know, he was talking about the 10 bhumis, the 10 levels of of bodhisattva, the Arya, the noble bodhisattvas, the realized bodhisattvas. 10 levels, right? And the first 7 are dealing with the afflictions, the emotional afflictions, and the last 3 are dealing with obscurations of knowledge. That's what he mentioned, this Sanskrit word jna, jna. You see it popping up everywhere, prajna, paramita, in Tara's mantra, and jnana. It's everywhere. And so it shows you how they're attacking this from all these different angles simultaneously. But there you go. Applying the 4 opponent powers is applying against the afflictions, those first 7 levels. Only an understanding of emptiness is able to cast them at their root, and that is the full understanding, the obscurations of knowledge, the last 3 levels of an enlightened bodhisattva. So all of this ties together, and this is the advantage of study, is that you start to see the interconnections, which reveals the underlying wholeness of our mind. And then all these different appearances, become useful. And this is the genius of the Vajrayana. Suddenly all those appearances are pure, and you're using them in this way. So it's like quicker. Throwing karma caused by kleshas with ignorance at their root, has cast one into this existence. One, seeing that virtue alone leads to birth in higher states, one should ask, what good is that by itself? It is still not freedom. And move on to this middle scope. This implies renunciation of the suffering of extensiveness. Even animals know the misery of suffering, and the suffering of change is easily perceived. But the human body itself is imbued with the suffering of extensiveness. And to realize this is a great insight. There is suffering in all states of samsaric existence, which is the implication of the Tibetan word kyapa. The body acts like a magnet for suffering. It is like a toothache. If there's no tooth, there's no ache. Having a body, one collects ever more karma, yet one needs this body in order to attain liberation. Like hot pepper, which burns, but which we need with some meals, or else the food is tasteless. Person of medium scope should recognize the 6 roots and the 20 secondary kleshas and contemplate on their karmic effects. Now, again, the importance of contemplation. This is strengthening our confidence and strengthening the directionality of our mind, because we're destroying doubts. I mean, the doubts are on the level of thought, of course. But again, there's so much meditation that happens, but people haven't done any of the analysis. So it loses, it loses a certain power, and we want the power, of course.
Say this is not a blind faith.
Absolutely.
Pound it out or something.
Absolutely. Not a blind faith. So one needs to contemplate how unvirtuous karma leads to the lower realms and virtuous to the higher, and how steady karma leads to the form and formless realms. Much time must be spent meditating on the 4 noble truths and sufferings as something experienced by oneself, not just by others. Of course, this is the immediate engagement and involvement. This is what practice is. And Buddhist studies, Buddhist knowledge is that engagement. That's the difference. This is not just, my daughters being academics. They see this all the time. This kind of sterile academic mindset where they're so wonderfully talking about all the suffering, all these people. They don't realize it's their own suffering. Then, after having determined the cause of suffering, one will have a pure wish to escape from it in all forms. And of course, the farther we go, we see the more subtle parts of suffering. As said, we all know the rank level physical suffering, gross suffering. You break your leg. Oh my God. Then there are all the emotional sufferings when, it can be huge. So we're all living with that. That's what we read about in the newspaper. Everybody recognizes that level of suffering. But it's said for the bodhisattva that there's a subtle type of suffering. We experience this subtle suffering all the time, but we don't recognize it. And the subtle suffering is like the example he gave was like a hair. If you have a hair in the palm of your hand, so you can be at a great wedding feast, for instance, and it's just wonderful. Everyone's happy in a worldly way. We call that happiness. But worldly happiness is actually suffering too, if you get deep into it. Why? It's like a hair in the palm of your hand. You don't feel it. It's suffering, but it's just kind of sensation is overwhelmed by everything else. It's so seemingly minor or subtle. But it's said for the bodhisattva, for the enlightened bodhisattva, it's like a hair in his or her eye all the time. They're constantly aware of that subtle suffering, which is the complete understanding of the First Noble Truth, and of course, naturally leads to the proper kind of efforts. But there too, knowing the First Noble Truth is not an easy thing. There's depth to it. At one point, Buddha's cousin, Ananda, who was one of the 10 great disciples, but of the 10 great disciples, he was the only one who did not come to enlightenment during the Buddha's lifetime. It was afterwards. Remarkable person, to be sure. And at one point, he was asking the Buddha a question, and he said something to the effect of like, "Now I understand the First Noble Truth that all life is dissatisfactory suffering." And he was going on to his point, and the Buddha said, "Stop right there," basically. And he gave one of these typically Indian examples of how many billions of lifetimes it takes to fully understand the First Noble Truth in its depth. So for us, do not be discouraged. We don't have the arrogance of thinking that we understand all this stuff perfectly, but at the same time, we have the great Vajra pride, the good pride, that we're doing this and working on our motivation and all of that. It's really something very significant. The preceding is an outline of the middle scope contemplations for a person of lesser mental capacity. One of great capacity should contemplate how sentient beings come into existence, or the 12 links of interdependent origination, resulting in the realization that the wheel of samsara is like a bucket or a rope going up and down in a well. All right, so what we've been discussing, it's all the middle scope, but the middle scope of sort of a, lesser, what do you call it? Lesser mental capacity. But it's sufficient. This is the greatness of the Dharma. It's not like graduate school or something. Whatever level one's at in their natural inclinations and intellect and all of that, it still works because it's not about, an IQ test. Again, there's this famous story of one of the Buddha's disciples who later became an arhat, completely self-liberated. I can't remember his name. But he was one of the monks, and he was having a lot of frustration. They were trying to teach him. He just couldn't teach anything. His mind just didn't work that way. And they gave him the mantra, the Om Mani Padme Hum. He couldn't memorize it. And, so he was very frustrated. People were frustrated with him. And so then they just gave him, no, I think he went to the Buddha at this point, with great discouragement. And the Buddha didn't say anything about him, but just said, "Here, why don't you do this?" And he gave him a job of sweeping the temple. And so he took to it. He was in the temple and he was sweeping the temple out every day and, developing this kind of habit and, some accomplishment, obviously. But then one morning he was sweeping one half of the temple, then went over and swept the other half. When he was done with the second half, he turned around. The first half was all full of dust again. So he just swept it again. And then he turned around, the other half had reaccumulated dust. But instead of giving in to anger and frustration, he just kept with this pure mind sweeping back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And he came to realization. So all of these methods, there are 84,000 different heaps of methods because there are 84,000 different heaps of sentient beings. But again, when there's that fundamental confidence, that fundamental faith that the Buddha was not mistaken, that the Buddha was not drunk, that the Buddha was not some sort of mean manipulator, then there's a seed of confidence. And that's it. That's what's necessary. And from that, everything grows. Okay, so where are we? We've got a little bit of time. Okay, so let's continue. We're still in the medium scope, but now a person of great capacity approaches the medium scope by the 12 links of interdependent origination. The 12 links are divided into 4 categories, branches or causes. So the 12 links of interdependent origination, pratitya samutpada in Sanskrit. In the wheel of life that you see, these 12 links have little panels with little symbolic teachings in each one. What happened to our wheel of life? It used to be up there over the. Yeah, it's gone. Yeah, we'll have to get that out because it's really so helpful. But nonetheless, 12 links of independent origination. 4 categories: propulsive causes, then the causes of existence, the result of the propulsive causes, and the result of existence. These Gelukma monks like this stuff. They get so heady. But nonetheless, let's try a bit if we can get through the medium. This is why someone of great capacity, I prefer the one of lesser capacity myself. All right, the 3 propulsive causes are ignorance, throwing karma, and consciousness, namshe. And the 3 causes of existence are craving, grasping, and existence. Ignorance may be linked to a farmer, propulsive karma to the seed, and consciousness both to casting the seed to the ground and the ground itself. So again, just touching on this, if you're like me, I just kind of like blank out a little bit. But what's amazing to me is you start to get this feeling of the appreciation of the depth of the Dharmic teachings. I mean, again, 1,500 years in India, and then started coming to Tibet. And these examples that are given are so helpful because they're so comprehensible. And this includes in higher teachings on meditation also. You know, what will arise in the mind and how it's characterized, like the teachings on death, for instance. You know, how they describe the different states that we go through. So again, these teachings have been honed for 2,500 years, and that's truly a remarkable thing. You know, it's like you can go right to the cookbook that does for you what you want it to do instead of banging around trying to figure out different recipes, experimenting. There's all sorts of that happening too, but the guide, the teachings are reliable. So the 3 propulsive causes: ignorance, throwing karma, and consciousness. The 3 causes of existence itself are craving, grasping, and existence. So ignorance is the farmer, propulsive karma is the seed, consciousness is both casting the seed and the ground itself, consciousness. Craving and grasping, which are the immediate or direct causes of existence in samsara, are likened to heat, moisture, and fertilization. Causes of existence is a type of cause very close to the result, whereas a propulsive cause is more distant. During the first instant, there is propulsive karma. And in the second instant, as the seed is being cast, thus requiring consciousness, it changes to potential power, also translated as instinct. And this may be likened to wood in the first case and to catching fire in the second. While existing in the formless realm, only the potential power of the five senses remains. But upon returning to the realm of form, the senses also return. Okay, so this is actually very, high level kind of teaching kind of stuff. We talk often about the six realms. Kempo will always be talking about the six realms. The Om Mani Padme Hum. Each syllable relates to one of the six realms. Three lower realms, you hear that a lot. The hellish beings, but there's tremendous numbers down there, both hot and cold hells. But hellish beings, hungry ghost beings, and then animals are the lower realms. And then the three higher realms of the six realms, human beings, sort of the fighting gods, and then the sensual gods, the devas. Again, I always get a kick out of, our Sanskrit roots because we call like a great female opera star, right? With all this ability and all this power and all this kind of attitude, a deva, a diva. Diva comes from Sanskrit. Deva, those are the gods, but they're the sensual gods. And that's so wonderful too, the discriminations. Because I'm not getting into theistic religions at all, but we're so sort of sloppy or vague with these terms. Whereas in Sanskrit, again, they were working it out for a long time, so they have a precision that is very helpful once you touch base with it a little bit. But nonetheless, the devas. So those are the six realms. And so it gets a little confusing for us because that's the realm of desire. So there are six realms within the realm of desire. And what's the realm of desire? It means we're all motivated by desire. The Buddha learned that even to sort of be without desire is a desire. We're stuck at this level. We can't pretend that there was something that we're not. We can't pretend that we're above it all. We're just loaded with this stuff. We're hardwired that way. So the greatness is that the Dharma uses that. So this ancient Indian categorization of the universe, more than the universe, but reality. There was the realm of desire. Then there, higher than that, was the realm of form. That gets a little confusing because it's subtle form. It's nothing that you can see in our realm of desire, but there's the realm of form. Rupa is form in Sanskrit. Rupa Dhatu, the realm of form. And then above that is the formless realm, Rupa Dhatu. The formless realm up there is divided into four. There are four stations of Brahma, they're called, and they get progressively more subtle, but they're all worldly. So the Buddha in his career, he attained with his first teacher, he attained to the third of the four stations of Brahma, temples of Brahma, Brahma Vihara. And with his next teacher, he attained to the highest, neither perception nor non-perception. That's how subtle it is. You can rest in that place, it's said, for thousands of years. The mind, there's neither perception of things nor non-perception of things. But it's still a worldly thing, meaning that you can fall out of that state. His teacher offered him, he said, you've come to the highest attainment and that you should teach my students then and I can retire. And he said, no, I haven't found the answer to suffering. So he wasn't satisfied. Then after his enlightenment, he converted all of this into, he like harnessed all these different states into things that would be conducive towards liberation, conducive towards enlightenment, conducive towards Buddhahood. So, for instance, those four states of Brahma, we recite them every Sunday, not knowing that they're the states of Brahma, but as love, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. Thank you, Keen. Yes, exactly. So he brought it all back down to earth. And this is just, I mean, mind-boggling, really, the completion of it all. Um, so back to chapter 11, my book fell apart. Yeah. So again, this is great capacity, middle scope, right? All right. Yeah. So while existing in the formless realm, only the potential power of the five senses remains. But upon turning to the realm of form, subtle form, the senses also return. So those subtle gods have senses, but they don't have desire. It's getting more and more subtle as you go up. We're just all stoked for desire. The sensual gods are too. The desire gods are called. These are the lower god realms. So again, he's just throwing these terms out as if the audience is familiar with these terms. This is why it's a little challenging. But the instinct resulting from both virtuous and non-virtuous acts has the power to manifest itself. For instance, if one studies something thoroughly in childhood, leaves it, and returns to it many years later, one has the power to regain the former knowledge quickly. It is the same for spiritual power or attainment, which passes from one lifetime to another. The instinct is placed in the stream of consciousness, its result manifesting in another rebirth, and it is due to this that some children have more learning potential than others. Existence immediately follows these six causes. To elucidate the latter three more clearly, Sredpa is the strong attachment to one's present body, especially when death is near. Lempa is attachment to form for the future life. And Ridpa, the equivalent of samsara, is the increased power of the karmic seed here at its strongest. The result is conception in the mother's womb. So he's taken us through these 12 links of dependent origination. This is this amazingly powerful and subtle description of karma and what we're doing. This step one generates the next, generates the next, generates the next, generates the next. It's this wheel going around and around and around. So the Buddha said the practice is because they all start with ignorance. And what did he say here? Ignorance is the farmer. Yeah. The whole thing is generated by the farmer. Buddha said, get rid of the ignorance. You lose the throwing karma. You lose the consciousness. You lose the craving and the grasping and all of these things. It's this like silver bullet. All right. We're not going to get through to the great scope tonight. This is too heady. So we'll start here next time on page 87.
There's a chance to contemplate.
Yeah, or read them and contemplate. Yes, very good. I have to reread. I know. It's not the kind of thing that you can, it's the kind of thing that should be read rather than listened to, really. You know, too many terms. But he's throwing out so much in such, I mean, one sentence, it's all these several concepts, each of which take explanation. But you get the idea of it. I mean, amazing that this wheel of interdependent origination. They see the process. I think I always say Pratitya Samutpada. You can translate for us. I always want to say codependent origination, which might be right too, but you know, all these things have different meanings in English, which, you know, this is the wrong thing. It's like, and of course, the meaning of words have changed in our lifetimes. So you could say something that was safe to say a long time ago is now somehow not good. And meanings turn upside down. Some of these, I can't remember. I heard a good one the other day. It really is not an emotional term at all, but how some basic term had the completely opposite meaning in the 1300s, and somehow it got flipped.
That's why they got rid of your classic joke book.
I think that's right. They hid my joke book. Really, I had a joke book that was. I'm such an old fart that my parents had the Reader's Digest. This would come out once a month, I think, and had all these little stories from different newspapers and magazines, but they're all condensed, so you could read them really easily. And they had jokes and they had all sorts of things. And this was the creation of a guy named Clifton Fadiman, who was head of the Reader's Digest publication. And somewhere along the line, I don't know how I came across it. I had a book of jokes that Clifton Fadiman put together. And there's some pretty outrageous things in there. Yeah, from the early 1950s. They had a whole chapter on Negro jokes, for instance.
But some of the funniest ones were the lawyer jokes.
Yeah, lawyer jokes are still working, but they had female jokes too. So you just couldn't go there. But I had this joke book. And again, I'm so inappropriate that even Clifton Fadiman doesn't resonate with anybody.
No.
It's
I mean,
like
there's no frame of reference. Right?
no frame of reference at all. All right. But if you can, start reading through chapter 11 of the book because it is heady, but you start to get a feeling, or at least something that comes up for me. So, when you do practice and there's years of just doing sadhanas and people together and talking and teachings and all this thing, and then you read something like this, you could have read it in the beginning, at least I did, but then you come back to it and you have a deeper understanding and you're so impressed at the skillfulness of these teachers. And for that matter, the power of how the Dharma has been, like I said, honed or developed. There's just no waste, very, very wonderful. Okay, so let's take a short meditation, short dedication, and conclude for tonight. May the sun of the Dharma, of transmission and realization, shine brighter and brighter. May the supreme holders of the doctrine of transmission and realization increase their activities. May those who hold the jeweled treasure of transmission and realization increase the Sangha, and may all be auspicious for spreading the practice and the study of transmission and realization. May every last one be free. Swaha. Okay, thank you all. And thank you for your patience in sitting through all that dry words. But they're alive once you poke them a little bit. And it's been so cool here that the plants haven't even dried out. I usually do my thing at the end of each Thursday of watering the plants with leftover water, but I don't want to drown our plants.
Be no clarity till Saturday.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I know, it's amazing.
It's like we're in a terrarium.
Terrarium.
Well, I mean, it's not really windy. It's like really rainy. It's misty.
Right. There's mist in the air like a terrarium, just like you say. Yeah. Okay. Creek. You know how to turn off the that? Thanks.
I'll let Ben know. He doesn't.
Yeah.
That's the best part, actually. That's how I learned English. I like missed a lot of analogies and I'm still learning.
Uh-huh.
Like I keep miss saying something and